Our next speaker joined Lutherans for Life in the summer of 2019. Now, if you do the math right, what that means is she's just now celebrating 5 years with our ministry. So let's give Michelle a round of applause. Hooray! 5 years with Lutherans for Life, and to many more. Michelle Bauman earned her Lutheran teaching degree in secondary education from one of our Concordias. The bad one. Concordia Seward, and a master's degree in English from the University of Indianapolis. Before she came to us at Lutherans for Life, Michelle taught middle school English at Holy Cross Lutheran in Fort Wayne, Indiana, while her husband, Doug, who is also with us, attended seminary. She then taught English, drama, and speech at Trinity Lutheran High School in Seymour, Indiana, and served as that high school's recruitment director. She currently resides in Columbus, Indiana, with her husband, Pastor Bauman, and they attend St. Paul Lutheran Church, Clifty. Together, they have 2 sons, and perhaps the best thing that their sons have brought them is a daughter-in-law. Michelle is our resident expert on youth and students and the sanctity of life, and so she is going to talk to us about raising kids for life. Please welcome Michelle Bauman.
All right. Thank you very much. Like Pastor McClanahan, I have to say that typically I'm not introduced so formally, so that feels a little bit odd. But feel free to call me Michelle. I am, like Pastor Salamanca said, the director of Y for Life, which is the youth branch of Lutherans for Life. And it is my pleasure and joy to speak to youth across the nation about how to become gospel-motivated voices for life. So I tend, as a teacher, to walk a lot. So I will try my best not to walk in front of my screen. I might have to come down here. But today, we want to talk about how to raise our own kids for life. And maybe, hopefully, this will also help as we think about grandkids, right? What can we do to continue to affirm and uphold their life, but also to teach them life lessons, help them through life issues that they may be experiencing. This topic is a real passion of mine for 3 reasons. First one is I am a parent, as Pastor Salamanca said. My husband is here with me. We have 2 wonderful gifts from God, 2 sons. Simeon, who is our youngest and tallest, now taller than his own dad, which he's very excited about, just turned 20 this last May. And our oldest, Nathaniel, just turned 23 last March. As Pastor Salamanca said, he also has brought a gift to our family. About a year and a half ago, I became a mother in love. And what a huge blessing. Our oldest son is currently a student at the seminary, and our youngest is a student at Concordia, Wisconsin, studying to be a computer scientist. He is so excited. He will be the only one in our family not in church work. So we are very blessed. I cannot tell you, and I'm sure you can relate, how my life, I did not realize how much my life would change as a parent 24 years ago when I became pregnant with Nathaniel. And not only did my life change, but God gave us an incredible blessing and opportunity, and I'm sure you can relate, not only to raise 2 children in the faith, but also to uphold their lives. And today, that is one of the reasons that I love to speak about this topic, because I'm going to get a chance to share with you some of the ways that we did that well, and maybe some of the ways we did not do that so well. So hopefully you can learn from our experience. So, parent, that's one of the reasons I'm passionate about the topic. Another is because of my background in education. So before I came to Lutherans for Life, I taught for 21 years. 4 years as a middle school teacher, and 17 as a high school English teacher. In those 21 years, I learned a lot. Not only was I able to teach a lot of students and help them through life issues, but I learned that Lutheran families, they're broken too. And we need to invest in our youth in ways that perhaps we didn't necessarily need to 20 years ago. They're facing more life issues today than I faced, certainly, as a high school student. And those young people are doing it in a culture that is not going to support or affirm what the church says. And so we want to be very purposeful about bringing the life issues and the answers to life issues to them. My third reason, I mentioned, new mother in love. We have a fantastic story, and sometime I would love to tell you the whole thing, but I will give you a very brief overview. Abby came to us. Abby was raised, and she's pictured here right by Nathaniel, was not raised in the church. She was raised in a family that was not Christian. And it is only by God's grace and mercy that she attended Concordia Chicago, met Nathaniel, took a theology class, and started asking questions. Today, she is married and going to become a pastor's wife. And she would tell you that there is no answer to the life issues that we face without Christ. In fact, she said in our house one time, I don't understand people who lose the faith. I've been there before, and there is no hope. So we're going to talk about how we can uphold our own children, but also how we can help our children see others as the neighbors that God intended them. I mentioned I was a teacher. Here's the lesson plan. We're going to start by talking about building a foundation and the importance of you as parents, and then of course as grandparents as well, who carry on that tradition or support the parents as they are engaging with their own children. We're going to talk about setting the stage for those conversations and some basic guidelines for conversations about life. I'm going to give you a few tips. We're going to talk about monitoring readiness, and we're going to talk about when to say when. And hopefully we're going to get all of that done in 45 minutes. Hopefully. All right. So let's talk about building that foundation. When do you start building a foundation to raise your children for life? And the answer to that question really was yesterday, right? It is the moment they're conceived. It is the moment that they're born. And I think for some parents, when they hear that, they think, oh no, I am way behind. But the truth is, you were likely doing that from the moment that your child was born. You see, when we answer the cry of a baby, when we change his diaper, when we feed her, we are affirming that her life is valuable. And that continues even through their toddler years in the way that we speak to our children, in the way that we care for them, in the way that we set behavioral standards or bedtimes or do things, build structures in our family that uphold life. I'm going to encourage you today to be very specific and purposeful about some of those actions. Some of them just come with good parenting. But sometimes, through good parenting, we have windows or doors that we can walk through and bring life issues to life for our kids. Why do we need to talk about it with our kids? Our kids are in Christian families, right? They should be okay. Well, the truth is, our children live in a broken world. And whether they experience that brokenness in our own families, which they will definitely experience that brokenness through their peers and through the families that they interact with, as well as through the world, which is brought right to them via your television, computer, or their phone. So, why do we want to talk about this? Because by the time they end up in high school, here's a list of just some of the life issues most youth encounter. Maybe they don't deal with it themselves. Maybe they don't struggle with suicidal ideation, or maybe they're not struggling with pornography, or maybe they haven't really considered bioethics, things like IVF yet, and yet some of their peers probably already have. And definitely social media has brought this awareness to them. So how important are you? Incredibly important. Martin Luther realized this a long, long time ago when he said, "Father and mother are apostles, bishops, and priests to their children, for it is they who make them acquainted with the gospel." You are the primary conveyors of both law and gospel. You are the primary people that God has placed in your children's life to uphold their lives and to enable them to see their neighbor as someone who is a gift from God. So there are two areas as parents that we're going to want to focus on. One, we want to ask our kids, we want to know that our children know that they are valuable and that their value does not depend on their intellect, on their athletic ability, on their beauty, on the things that they can do. Their value is inherent in them because of the things God has done in their life, the three things God has done among a multitude of them. One, that God the Father has created them, woven them together in their mother's womb. There is no life that exists without God begetting that life. Every human being is valuable because God created them. Second, because their life is redeemed. They were bought back from sin, death, and the devil by the cross, by the work of the cross of Jesus Christ, by his very blood. That had nothing to do with what we are able to do. It is all gift. And the third reason that their life is valuable is because the Holy Spirit has called them to faith, and that he desires to call all people to faith. We see every human being as valuable because God is at work in every human being's life, whether they know it or not. Martin Luther reminds parents, you are the conveyors of those gifts. You bring your children to church to receive those gifts in person, but you are the representation of the gospel in your home. Today, in modern society, it's very easy for parents to think, yeah, but my kids, they listen to a whole lot of other things. They're influenced by others, and it's true. As our kids get older, they are influenced by other things, whether that be their peers or social media or culture in general. But here's an interesting study that took place just a few years ago by upliftfamilies.org. It says, parents are the #1 influence in their children's lives. Parents don't always believe this. In a Parents Empowered survey, parents place themselves last in the lineup of influences on their children. But when the youth answered the same question, they placed their parents first, before family, friends, teachers, and activities or clubs. That tells us something, doesn't it? Now, how many of you are raising middle school kids right now? Any? Yeah, at least one in here. So this is the start of the hard times. Yes? Grandparents, would you say that maybe have been the start of the difficult? Some. So again, as they're getting more connected to their peers and wanting the acceptance of their peers, remember that you actually hold a much more influential place in their lives than the people around them. So how do we set the stage for life conversations? There's a few things we can do. One of the things is we build family trust by building bonding opportunities. Turns out that the old adage, quality time over quantity time, actually is false. What kids need is both. And research shows this. Children not only need quality time with each parent to build trust and to create opportunities for conversations that are hard, but they also need quantity time. They need the daily ins and outs, the making of breakfast, the showering and bathing and getting kids to bed, the driving to school. You probably already have in your families, or maybe your kids are doing this with your grandkids, structures that support their life. Structures like drives to school, or family dinners, or walks with mom or dad. Those are some of the structures that we had as our kids were growing up. They knew family dinners, this is the time we're going to gather together. They knew, both of them, they would be taking walks with mom, and we would have discussions on those walks. A lot of those family bonding times, they could be playing games. They should be definitely going to church. They could be serving together or cleaning or doing an activity together. Every family is different, but we create structures, and during those structures, we have opportunities for conversations to engage our children in questions about life, to ask them about how they view themselves and the world around them. That's when we teach the truth about life. So when we start from little on up, monitoring how they view themselves. As a kindergartner, this might start with, how was your day? When kids come home from school or when grandchildren come over, how have you been? That gives them the opportunity to talk about the things that are important in their life. And through those conversations, we're going to have an insight into how they view themselves. Well, it wasn't so great because so-and-so didn't play with me today. We have an opportunity to uphold our child's identity right there. But it's not just our own child's identity that we get the chance to talk about, but also the identity of others. I would encourage not only the casual question, but also the very purposeful one, the one that stretches our kids a little bit. So let's go back to the kindergartner. We ask how the day went, right? And it either went really great or maybe not so great. For high school, by the way, one of the ways to get them to talk, ask for a high and a low. Something really wonderful that happened in their day and something that maybe wasn't so wonderful. Again, gives us an entryway into discussing. But to go back, to be very purposeful, we also want to know how they view, we want them to know how to view themselves properly. So you might ask a kindergartner, do you know why you are so precious to me? Do you know what makes you so valuable to me? Do you know why I love you? Asking them the question makes them think. Wonder, what is it about me that makes me wonderful? And then you get the chance to help them work through that answer. Now, I would encourage you to ask those same questions of high schoolers too. You're probably going to get a different reaction, like, oh, mom, right? But no, let's really talk about this. Why is it, even when you do something that's wrong, you're still really very special to me? In addition to monitoring, we're going to want to define boundaries with God's word. So what that means is, not so much we're going to define the boundaries for our kids as far as conversations. We want them to come to us with any and every question, because you are the person that God has placed in your child's life to answer that question. And we want them to be able to feel as if they can come to us. But what we're going to do is define our answer or provide our answers based on God's boundaries. So when your middle school son comes up and says, Mom, I saw this picture today of a naked girl. How do you respond? We're going to respond with God's boundaries, right? I see. And how did you see that picture? And do you think that picture is a good picture or not? It's not a good picture, is it? Because that girl and that girl's body is a wonderful gift from God. Right? So we're going to define those life issues. We're going to set the limits based on God's word. When your high schooler asks, what do I do when my friend has decided that she might be transsexual or trans? We're going to find that by God's word. But we're also not going to make our children feel ashamed of asking the question. And that's pretty key. So some basic guidelines. When a child comes and asks an uncomfortable question, and they will, if we have an open conversation, if we offer our kids an opportunity to ask whatever questions they want, they'll ask us some questions that make us feel uncomfortable. And as adults, sometimes our responses are going to be, we feel so uncomfortable, we're going to ignore the question. We don't want to do that. Sometimes our response is going to be, we feel so uncomfortable that we're going to put that onto our kids and say, why are you asking that question? Right? So they feel maybe they shouldn't have asked that question. Instead, we're going to remain calm, maybe take a few deep breaths, and then get started. It's okay not to have the answer to every question. And it's okay to say to our kids, you know what? I don't know, but let's talk to Pastor about this. Or let's bring in your dad or your mom or those sorts of things. But it's important to address the question. First, though, we're going to understand our child's developmental stage. How many of you have young grandchildren? Okay, so I'm going to be going through in just a few minutes some developmentally appropriate conversations to have with our kids. and with our grandkids, right? And of course, as grandparents, you're going to want to support your kids to have those conversations with their children. But there are going to be times when you are with your grandchild that your grandchild might open up. And what an opportunity for you to uphold life with them. So we're going to understand that child's stage of development, and we're going to look for what the real question is. I'm going to give you an example of this in just a minute. We'll come back to that. And then we're going to answer the real question, developmentally appropriate. We're not going to give more information than the child needs, right? But we're going to do our best to answer what's really being asked. Because if a child is old enough to ask a question, they're old enough to get an answer. It might not be the complete answer, but an answer in part. We want to do that to continue that trust. So here's the conversation tips. Remember, I use an acronym called Calvary, which hopefully will help you remember how maybe some steps. This is a really great one for when you're interacting just with the general public on life issues as well. Okay? Although the first C is a little bit different. I do a little bit different when we're talking about someone who's not a close neighbor, right? Who's not related to us. But I think, especially when our kids come up with questions that might be hard, the first thing is just to take a moment and remain calm. And here's an example of that. So, we have two children. One of our children, on the way home from preschool one day, said to me in the car, and it was, four-year-old preschool, said to me in the car, "I love Zach." Now, Zach was my son's best friend. And he's 4 years old, right? So I know that when my son is saying, "I love Zach," he's not expressing any sort of sexual appeal, right, toward another person. But I have an opportunity right here to bring in a life-affirming conversation, to build a life-affirming conversation. So I say, "I'm glad you love Zach. He's a good friend." "Yep, and I'm going to marry him someday." Okay, how many of you make that, like, raises your heart rate a little bit, makes you feel a little uncomfortable? I'll admit, I felt a little uncomfortable at that point, right? And the reason, now you don't have the history, I did. The reason he said this is because just the week before, we had gone on vacation, and there was this place that we went to, and he and I really loved this place, and my husband and our other son was like, we want to go home, and looking forward to getting home. And my son said to me, "It's okay, Mom, someday we'll get married and go move there," right? And my husband had to say to him, "Nope, sorry, you can't marry your mom because she's already married to me, and you can only marry one person in your life." We've just taught him a life lesson, right? We've addressed a life issue. Marriage is between a husband and wife, and it's for life. Sorry. At least we thought we had maybe taught the husband and wife thing. But now, my son says, "I'm going to marry him someday." You see, he also knew that when you really cared about someone, marriage was a good thing. He saw marriage as a beautiful blessing between his dad and me, and it was something that he desired. And so I want to, by nature, uphold that gift of marriage, but also explain that two boys can't marry each other. So I said, "Yeah, I can see why you would want to, but unfortunately, a boy can't marry a boy." "Why not?" Now, for this level of development, anytime we can relate life issues to something that we observe naturally in the world, something scientific, that's almost always going to be life-affirming. God is the God of science too, and so science often is very life-affirming. So what I said was, I wasn't going to say the name, but now you know. Nathaniel, Nathaniel, do you remember how last week we learned about magnets? Yeah. And how we have a plus magnet and a minus magnet? Yeah. Well, the plus magnets are the girls, and the minus magnets are the boys. And what happens when you bring a plus magnet and a minus magnet together? They match, right? They stick together. But what happens when you bring a plus and a plus or a minus and a minus together? They push apart. That's what it's like. Boys can't marry boys because that would be two minuses together. Oh, okay. So we just remain calm, right? And address it at a level in which he's ready to hear. So some basic steps. Remain calm, ask some questions if you're not sure where he's coming from. Now again, I had that history. We had talked about marriage the week before. I knew that he he loved his friend, and so I could jump right in. Then listen. Listen to what it is they're really saying. What Nathaniel was really saying was he loved his friend, and he really liked spending time with him. He also was saying, someday, marriage looks pretty cool and something that he might want to take part in. And yes, that is good. All of those things are good. Then we're going to verify, right? So at the end of that, Nathaniel said, okay. And I said, do you have any other questions? Nope. Affirm. We're going to affirm the things that are good and the things that are godly, and we're going to respond to the things that potentially could become ungodly. And then that last part is yoke. So you know in an oxen that a yoke divides the weight, right? That two oxen then carry the weight or share the load. And as parents, when we have young children, we're going to want that yoke to lift the burden off of our son or off of our children. Eventually, as they become older, we're going to place a little more burden on their shoulders. But when they're young, I could have gone into, well, see, there's this thing called homosexuality, and God says no to that. But I didn't even want him to know about homosexuality yet. That would come later, right? So the yoke is meant to lift. All right. So for those of you who have young preschool to second grade young kids or grandkids, we're going to go through some developmental stages, and then we're going to match them with life issues, things that they're ready to talk about or to learn about. And I would encourage you actually to bring some of these up before the life issue actually comes, and I'll point some of those out. But at preschool through grade 2, those students can focus on one aspect or dimension at a time. They're able to think about things that have no physical presence, such as love, as well as events that happened in the past or will happen in the future, like marriage. They're able to understand identities in terms of relationships. They know their place in their family. Nathaniel was exploring that, right? Where was he going to be? What is a son? How is that different from a father or a husband? They begin to classify and categorize, and they understand numbers, patterns, and can quantify. So life issues that work well at this stage, talking about different types of relationships, like family, friend, acquaintances, how some of them are closer than others, and how we can trust our family, maybe more than we can trust an acquaintance, right? How we might want to be more careful in those situations. Roles and responsibilities. What does a mom do that's different from a dad? How does God give husbands and wives different responsibilities and ways to uphold the family? Different types of love. We covered that conversation. Race and skin tone. This is what I would encourage you to talk about before it comes up. I told you I was going to give you some examples of things I did well. Here's one that I didn't do so well. So we were in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I remember, I have it like clearly emblazoned in my mind. I was walking around with one of our sons, and he had seen people of different skin tones all of his life. But on that day, he noticed them. And we were in the mall full of people with different skin tones. And he pointed and he said, "What's wrong with that man's skin?" Okay, make you uncomfortable? Yes, make me uncomfortable, right? But we're going to remain calm. And of course, immediately I'm going to respond with, "Oh, you know what? We all have slightly different skin. Look, your skin is a little bit different than mine, and isn't it so beautiful? God made us in different skin colors, and there's such a great variety. Isn't that wonderful? My son's response was, oh, that is wonderful. And then we spent the rest of the day with him pointing out people with different skin tones. So I would encourage you just to have that conversation and point it out at a safe time and location when you're not in a very crowded mall. Next, differences between male and female. It's good to talk about those differences, to note those differences, and to talk about how each of those differences is a gift from God. Let's start when they're very young, because the truth is, the world is going to try and confuse them on this, even starting in kindergarten. We see already books that are incorporated into public schools that create some of that confusion. So we're going to start that very, very early. Identify and value all humans, right? The value of all humans, and talk about that in terms of kindness, right? That's something that a preschool through second grader can understand. The unborn and how babies come to be. If your children grow up and mom's pregnant with other kids, they'll ask questions. So it's good to have those conversations and to be very life-affirming from the beginning. If I have time at the end, I'll tell you a story about that as well, but I want to make sure we get to the end. And then finally, how to handle rejection. Rejection starts pretty early. Someone didn't play with me. Someone said something not so nice. Once those kids get to middle school, we start to have some mental health problems. In fact, before middle school, about 4th grade. So when this starts to happen, we're going to talk about rejection with our kids and how that doesn't change our identity. And maybe that person was just having a bad day. Or maybe that person needs a friend, right? And how can we show kindness in response? Next level then, grades 3 through 5. So 3 through 5, anybody have kids in their lives in this area? Okay. So at this point, children are able to understand issues, ideas, and people that are not one-dimensional. So they're going to understand that there's some complexities. They're going to begin to be able to infer truths based on observation. This is when they start to mimic you, right? Or maybe even be able to say, but you did it a little differently, right? They understand the principle of conservation. So that's the idea that water in a bowl, when we pour it in a glass and it's a different shape, it's still the same amount of water. So we're getting some more complex thinking ability. We know that kids at this age can consider numerous outcomes and multiple perspectives. They start to ask the question, what if? What if? Right? And if one little change happens, how does that change me? And then they understand subcategories. They recognize multiple levels of complexities. So here are some life issues that you can talk about. And really, I would encourage you to start the conversation. The goodness of sex in marriage. This is an important one. Most often, we talk about sex in terms of the negative, right? Sex, that's something you shouldn't do. It's bad, right? We don't want to have sex outside of marriage. When one of my sons was in 5th grade, we were on the way home from church. Seems like we're always on the way home from church. And we're at the point where we're about ready to pull into, we were pulling into the garage. And one of my sons asked, Mom, do you and Dad have sex? Does that make anyone uncomfortable? Yeah. That's right. So the question, of course, is, again, I want my son to ask that question of us rather than his peers, right? And to find out about sex from us rather than his peers. I did answer, yes. And my son started bawling. He cried really hard. Okay? And I turned around and said, what's wrong? Why are you crying? Because sex is bad. Why do you do that? It's so bad. Okay. I had failed to teach, or we had failed to teach, that sex in marriage is actually a good gift. And the truth is, it starts to be talked about in 4th and 5th grade. So this is one of those things, if I could go back and redo, I would have introduced it before 5th grade. This is definitely a time to talk about identity and puberty, the goodness of the body, and possibly pornography. Research shows that kids are getting exposed to pornography between the ages of 10 and 12 for the first time. If your child is on social media or your grandchild is on social media, you can back that up at least 2 years. If they have open access to the internet, back it up at least 2 years. It is the largest money-making endeavor on the internet today. In fact, it makes more money than the National Football League does. We have a really great resource in back at the Lutherans for Life table on pornography. I would encourage you to pick it up or download it. You can find it at yforlife.org for free. It gives you some really great stats and things that you can talk about or share with your kids before they even are tempted by it. I would definitely talk about body image and eating disorders, also things that start around the 4th grade level. Peer pressure, Christian versus secular viewpoints, and morality. So we're going to start talking about the differences between what other people believe. Again, when we have the worldview in our home, it's okay to address that. In fact, it's really good if our kids are exposed to the worldview to actually bring it up and to talk about it, right? Because we want them to know they can come to us to ask those questions. How to form strong friendships, and that strong friendships are really good. We touched on this morning about how hard it is for young men in particular to have friendships, and that's what the statistics show actually, that young men today in their middle school, high school, college years are lacking good friends. Not because they don't necessarily know how to make them, but because they're afraid of what people will think if they do have a strong male friendship. So let's encourage our kids to have those friendships and to tell them that those are normal and healthy. Here's what research shows. People who get married without having had strong friendships are less likely to have successful marriages. That's interesting. And it's not strong friendships with the opposite sex, but it's strong friendships with the same sex. It's in those friendships that we learn empathy, we learn how to share, we learn how to take turns. Those friendships teach us a lot apart from sexuality. Finally, we're going to talk about life issues like how to handle stress, worry, and anxiety. LFL, Y for Life, has an anxiety brochure, and it is one of the hottest brochures that comes off my table when I'm at gatherings, when I'm at youth gatherings. But interestingly enough, I have a lot of parents who start picking that brochure up, and I always ask, what age are your kids? 4th grade. That's about when it starts. Okay? So we're going to talk about those things from, again, a Christian perspective, from a biblical perspective. 6th through 8th grade, anyone have kids in this age? Okay, we've got a few, or grandkids. So 6th through 8th grade, this is a time when kids start to question authority, when they're going to push back, when they start to think critically in a way that they have not before. They need very clear guidelines and very clear boundaries, and they need to push against them so that their faith becomes their own. There's a reason why most of us, most of our Lutheran churches have confirmation in grades 6 through 8. It's because this is a primary time to teach that faith, to ask the questions that are challenging. So our kids at this age, they're able to think abstractly, they're able to hypothesize, they have a deep desire for fairness, but they're also very egocentric. So they're very focused on not only fairness, but fairness for them, right? What's best for them. They're adept at thinking in hypothetical situations. This is also the what if continues, and they're very good at coming up with like the odd, yeah, but what if? This is when abortion in cases of rape and incest probably are going to come up if they know about abortion, right? Even instances that may be fantastical, like what if, like we talk about end of life, what if someone gets a car accident and they can't walk anymore and all they can do is blink, and those sorts of things, right? Something very fantastical. They also have difficulty planning and prioritizing. They are impulsive. They like to test limits. This is a great time to show a lot of patience and care to our children, to uphold their lives and continue to say to them, I love you even when you do something wrong. And then they're often unable to see long-term consequences. So they don't have that frontal lobe yet. In fact, that frontal lobe won't solidify, won't mature to its full extent until age 25. And so they don't have the ability to see those long-term consequences. Now they'll start to learn, they'll start to gain that ability, but ask me at the end about cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers and what that does to that frontal lobe, okay? So, life issues that you can start talking about at this time and should. God's gift of logic and emotion, these are both good gifts. We don't want to necessarily be controlled by either one. We want logic and emotion to be guided by God's word. We're going to talk about the 10 Commandments and how the 10 Commandments actually protect a gift that God wants to give. And each of those 10 Commandments is related to multiple life issues, right? So what about this commandment? What life issue is it connected to? This is one where they're going to start to hear, especially if they're on social media, about abortion, about birth control, and about sex. So we're going to want to have these conversations even when they're uncomfortable. And we have some really great resources at Wife for Life to help you do that. And I'll highlight some of those at the end. We're going to want to talk about identity in Christ, service to others, the goodness of the body. Definitely, if you did not talk about pornography before 5th grade, by 6th grade through 8th grade, it has to come up because it's going to come up among their peers, right? And the topic of self-pleasure. We're going to want to talk about peer pressure again, which we already were talking about earlier. Romantic relationships and the difference between those. What does it look like? What does good, healthy dating look like? What does it look like to have a healthy relationship rather than a codependent one? Also, they're going to be aware of homosexuality. They're going to be aware of the world's view of sexuality and the transgender movement by this time. So we are going to want to talk about these things. Talk about social media guidelines, safety, and online identities that people sometimes don't have the best interest, your best interest in mind. This is also a great time to start talking about how we deal with anxiety, suicide, suicidal ideation, depression, those sorts of things. And then what it means to have healthy relationships and how those should be in person. So today's youth, their tendency is to have conversations via text, right? Via instant message. And unfortunately, that has left them at a disadvantage as they move forward and look for a spouse, right? Some of those basic skills that maybe we learned when we were younger, they're a little bit behind on. COVID obviously set some of that up for them, right? It took the ability away to be in person. So we want to really encourage those in-person opportunities like youth group, like church, like going to school and doing things extracurricular afterwards, having friends over, those sorts of things. Finally, we're going to hit our last section. And how am I doing on time? I'm running out of time. Done. Okay, well, here are grade 9 through 12. This is a great time to help kids think abstractly. They're going to be very actually engaged. Today's generation, when we look at Gen Zers and the Alpha generation, it seems is going to be the same. They're very engaged in politics, so this is a great time to engage them in that area and talk to them about how to apply faith and life to the issue of politics. They're going to be very concerned or maybe more drawn to their place in the world. So this is a great time to teach them to stand firm, but also to teach them how to continue to uphold the lives of others, right? So human trafficking, homelessness, these are some of the things that we want to bring in. So we'll talk about sexual intimacy in marriage, talk about addiction. This would be a great time to teach apologetics for the preborn. We want to teach about physician-assisted suicide and end of life. This time period in a young person's life may be the first time that they experience a loss via death. Healthy relationships, human trafficking, homelessness, how to handle stress, worry, you see that has come up again and again. So, final 2 slides. Last thing, I would say there are limits, obviously, and we want to answer the question being asked, but we don't want to go to the next level, right? So let's answer the question developmentally appropriate without, again, putting that yoke on their shoulders. But we're also going to avoid answering questions that God is going to answer for them later. Things that will happen in between a couple who is married. And then finally, I would encourage you to watch for fixations, especially fixations about sexual things. And the reason that I bring this up is because those fixations sometimes can be indicative of abuse that has happened without your knowledge. As a Lutheran teacher, I did end up needing to help families through this on a couple of different occasions. And I'm sure pastors, you've had that experience as well. So if there seems to be a fixation, it might be a good thing to bring up to a pastor or to a Christian counselor so that maybe some things, if they have happened, can be uncovered. I have a whole list of things, and I would encourage you to take a picture of this because we can't go through them. But I do want to hold up, in back, we have infographics on the following topics. Cohabitation. This is really great, lots of facts. This one's on abortion, and we have abortion in fast facts, abortion in race, lots of them. This is the one on pornography. This is the one on health risks. We have one on human trafficking. Again, we have so many resources. All are free and downloadable from the whyforlife.org website. One on physician-assisted suicide. Here's one on anxiety. Suicidal ideation, 10 reasons not to take your own life. This is on IVF. It's a two-parter. This one's on birth control. We have a set of 3 on human development. So these are good ones to kind of bring in. They have pictures in the back, especially as your kids get older. And we did just start Little Lutherans for Life, which is for preschool through age 2, or through 2nd grade, preschool through 2nd grade. We have some starter things that you can take a look at. This is morning prayer and evening prayer. But we also have box sets and I'll have these in back. I only have one here, but again, you can order them online. This one is all about feelings and emotions and how to handle them from a God-pleasing and life-affirming view. And it has activities on the inside for kids to do, coloring, things to talk through with you, prayers to say, hymns. The next set, or the other set, is Words in the Church. And we have one that just came out, and I didn't even have time to pack it, and that's about the 9 months of development. So, thank you so much. I leave you with these last 2 Bible verses. One from Proverbs 22 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." I remember as a parent, that was encouraging, but it also felt a little bit like the law. Like, oh, maybe I didn't raise my children. Have I done enough? And so I want to also share this verse. "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Thank you very much.